Have you ever, like, I don't know, had that moment where you kind of stop and you're like, wait, should I say can or could? It's like this tiny little thing that tricks you up. And it's funny because even when you've been speaking English for like forever, sometimes those modal verbs, they can be super tricky. So for this deep dive, we are zeroing in on that, the differences between can and could. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll all have that like, oh, okay, I get it now moment. We're going to be looking at how they work with like present and past abilities, how they're used in polite requests, and then even how they show up when we're talking about possibilities and, hypotheticals and stuff.
Yeah.
So are you ready to kind of unlock this whole can and could mystery?
Absolutely. It's really interesting because, as modal verbs, both can and could add these specific shades of meaning to what we're saying. They give us information about ability or possibility or sometimes even obligation, right? And it's pretty cool how this tiny change, just one letter, can make a huge difference depending on how you use it. And we've got some really cool examples here that I think will make things super clear.
Okay, so let's jump right in. And like one of the most basic differences right off the bat is present versus past ability. And the material we have is pretty straightforward about this. So can basically tells us about an ability that you have like right now. Like if I say I can swim,
Yeah.
pretty simple.
Right.
It means that at this very moment I have the skills, the physical ability, whatever, to actually swim.
Yeah, exactly. And that present tense is like the key thing here with can. It's all about what's happening in the now. And we see a similar thing with she can speak Spanish. Again, it's about an ability that exists right now. It's a skill she currently possesses.
Okay, so that's can. Now let's switch gears over to could. And what our material really highlights is that could often points to an ability that existed in the past. So like take this example. When I was young, I could run fast. As soon as you hear that could, it sort of implies like maybe I can't run that fast anymore, right? Like time has passed, things might have changed.
Right, that shift in time, that's exactly what could is doing a lot of the time in these situations. And we can see that even more clearly in this example. He could play the piano when he was a child. Again, the suggestion is that this ability was something he had in the past, not necessarily something he can still do now. So a really important takeaway here is that can is your go-to word for talking about abilities you have right now, while could often takes us back in time a bit.
Yeah, I think separating abilities by time, that seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But this is where things get like a lot more interesting. Let's talk about polite requests because like both can and could pop up when we're asking for something. But the level of politeness, like that changes, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. And it's one of those subtleties that can actually have a big impact on how people interpret what you're saying. Our sources are really clear about this. So when you use can in a request, it tends to come across as like more casual. Imagine you're talking to a friend and you say, "Can you help me?" It's direct, it's informal, it's just a very natural way to ask someone you're close to.
Right, exactly. It's the kind of language you use with people you know well. Now, what about could you help me? Our material really emphasizes that this is way more polite. It's more formal.
Yeah, and it's amazing how that one little L adds so much to the tone. It kind of makes it less of a command and more of a question about whether something is possible, which I think shows more respect for the other person's freedom to choose, and that's why it comes across as more polite.
Exactly. And our source actually even suggests that if you're in a formal situation, like if you're sending an email or if you're talking to someone who's, kind of important, always go with could, just to make sure you sound respectful. It's a good reminder actually. I remember this one time I used can in an email to my boss, and looking back it felt a little too, I don't know, abrupt.
I think that's a really good point. It's all about being aware of the situation and then choosing the modal verb that kind of fits that level of formality.
Yeah, totally. So we've seen how could can take us back in time with abilities, but now it's like that same could is also changing how we make requests in the present. It's kind of cool. All right, let's move into something a little more nuanced. Possibility and uncertainty. This is where could really gets to show off, like how flexible it is. What our sources explain is that could is often used to talk about things that might happen in the future, but it has like less certainty than can.
Yeah, that's a super important difference. When you use can to talk about possibilities, it suggests that something is pretty likely to happen, maybe because you have some good evidence for it. Like, think about the weather. If you say, it can rain tomorrow, it implies that maybe the forecast is saying there's a high chance of rain.
Right, right. But then if you say it could rain tomorrow, it creates this totally different feeling.
Hmm.
Like our source is saying that there's less of a clear indication. Maybe it's just that time of year when rain is a possibility, but there are no like specific signs pointing to it. So there's more uncertainty packed into that could.
Exactly. Could introduces this element of like, maybe. It's like, yeah, something might happen, but we don't really have strong evidence or like clear signs to say for sure.
And we see a similar kind of thing with this example. She can be late versus she could be late. Now that first one, she can be late, that makes it sound like it happens a lot, like it's kind of expected, right?
Yeah, it suggests a pattern of behavior. It's a possibility that happens frequently enough that it's become, kind of predictable.
Right. But she could be late. That's different. It's like, yeah, it's possible, but we don't necessarily think it's going to happen. It's more in the realm of the unknown.
Right. It acknowledges the potential, but without that sense of, a regular pattern or those strong indicators that we often associate with can in these situations.
Okay, so could handles those less certain possibilities. Now let's step into the world of like pure imagination,
Sure.
hypothetical situations. And here our material is crystal clear. Could is the king. It's like could opens up this door to a whole different reality, a world of what ifs, things that aren't actually real right now.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. When we're talking about things that aren't currently true, or maybe they depend on certain conditions that haven't been met, could is the modal verb you want to use.
Like think about that classic example. If I had more money, I could travel the world. The moment you hear could travel, you immediately know that, okay, this is all hypothetical. It depends on this condition of having more money, which right now is not the case.
Exactly. And that if part of the sentence, that really sets the stage for could. It introduces this condition that has to be met for the action, like the traveling, to become a reality.
And this other example shows the same thing. You could pass the test if you studied harder. Again, that could pass is connected to this hypothetical idea of studying harder, which right now isn't happening enough.
Yeah, and it points to this potential outcome that depends on changing the current situation. So could really anchors us in that world of like, what if or under different circumstances.
All right, we've covered a ton of stuff here. So let's really nail this down for you with a super clear summary. So first of all, when should you generally go for can?
So based on our sources, can is the verb you want to use when you're talking about something you can do right now in the present. It's about your current abilities. And it's also used for those informal requests, the ones you make with friends or people you're close to. And then when it comes to possibility, can suggests that something is pretty likely. There's a high degree of certainty.
Awesome. And what about could? When does that usually come up?
Could steps in when you're talking about something you were able to do in the past. It's for past abilities. And it's your go-to for making polite requests because it adds that touch of formality and respect. And then when you're discussing possibilities, could suggest that something is less certain. There's more of a like a maybe feel to it. And then really importantly, it's the one you want to use when you're talking about hypothetical situations, things that are imaginary or depend on some condition.
That's a perfect summary. Okay, now, just to really make sure this is sticking, let's do a quick little mental exercise, like a little review to help you actually use this stuff. So imagine you see these sentences and you got to fill in the blank with either can or could. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, first one. Blank, you open the window, please. So thinking about everything we've talked about, what feels right in that sentence.
Well, given the please, the most appropriate choice here, and what the source material really emphasizes for polite requests, would be could. It's just a much more formal and considerate way to ask.
Exactly. All right, next one. When I was 5, I blank ride a bike. So thinking about past abilities, what's the answer?
For an ability that existed in the past, the correct modal verb is could. So the full sentence would be, when I was 5, I could ride a bike.
Spot on. All right, last one. She blanks speak 3 languages. Now this one's highlighting the skill she has right now. So what fits best?
Since it's about a present ability, the answer is can. So the sentence would be, she can speak 3 languages, which really emphasizes her current linguistic skills.
Awesome. Hopefully going through those examples has kind of helped everything click into place. It all boils down to paying attention to the context, right? Is it happening now or did it happen in the past? How polite do you need to be? How certain is the possibility? And are we talking about reality or are we imagining something?
Yeah, those are the key questions to ask yourself when you're trying to decide between can and could. It's all about understanding those subtle differences in meaning.
So we've really taken a deep dive into can and could today. And hopefully you're feeling way more confident about using them now. And guess what? This whole world of modal verbs, it's all connected. So next time, we're going to tackle another tricky pair, will versus would. And you can kind of see how some of the things we talked about today, like formality and hypothetical situations, might come into play there too.
Definitely. When you understand the nuances of one pair of modal verbs, it can often make it easier to understand others. They all work together to create this like really subtle way of expressing meaning in English.
So as you go about your day, just start paying attention to how you and other people use can and could. Think about those specific situations where you might now choose one over the other based on what we've talked about today. It's by like actually observing and thinking about your own communication that you can really make this stuff stick. So until our next deep dive, keep those language brains working.